Well, this afternoon, here's what we know. Ghana may not be able to move bulk of its citizens out of poverty in the next generation. That's the caution coming through from the longest-serving finance minister, Dr. Botchwey, who's reflecting on the country's growth trajectory 60 years after independence. Now, the 65-year-old republic is today witnessing its slowest growth rate ever. Although government attributes this to the outbreak of COVID-19, Professor Botchwey thinks otherwise. The former government appointee believes that Ghana's economy is in distress and its policies are no longer seeming to be credible.
Countries with whom we started the development race and with whom we are often compared, understandably, because we started from about the same levels of GDP per capita, talking about Korea especially, with whom, as you all know, we've been compared time and again. Some of these countries that we started the journey with are now knocking on the doors of the first world, the countries of high income status, while we desperately cling to the lower rungs of middle income, which is where we are. Indeed, at the average rate at which we have been growing, it is well nigh certain that we would not have moved the bulk of our poor out of poverty in another generation, quite possibly of more. At the rate we are growing, and I don't deny that we are, it is clear, studies say, that we would not have moved the bulk of our poor out of poverty in another generation, 30 years.
And don't forget that we have our eyes on the evacuation plan for you. We'll bring you some updates in our subsequent bulletins. But our big story for today that we're focusing on is Ghana at 65. Ghana may not be able to move a bulk of its citizens out of poverty in the next generation. And that's the caution coming through from the longest-serving finance minister, Dr. Botchwey, who's been reflecting on the country's growth trajectory 60 years after independence. The 65-year-old republic is today witnessing its slowest growth rate ever. Although government attributes this to the outbreak of COVID-19, Professor Botchwey thinks otherwise. He believes that our economy is at its brink. And earlier we brought you some of the figures already breaking down the trajectory for you. But let's now expand this conversation and speak to Godwin Emisa. He's a chartered economist with the Institute of Chartered Economists. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on The Pulse. So what's your take really on our growth trajectory? In 2011, actually, we were peaking in terms of how fast we're growing as a nation. But the story is different now. What's your greatest fear looking at our trend of development?
Oh, well, thank you very much. I would want to send regards to your listeners. I think some few years down the line, we have not been quite stable in terms of growth. And permit me to differentiate between growth and development. Normally, we may want to use a real GDP growth rate to explain what growth is. And then when we're looking at development, we're also looking at how long and sustainable this growth will be, and its reflection on the people or the income of the people, or how you can move the economy from, let's say, middle income to an upper income country. Development entails a lot in terms of judiciary, media, government, economic government, etc. But when we are talking about growth, then we are looking at the GDP growth rate. And I think if we're looking at the growth rate, then I think we have not been quite successful in sustaining it in terms of its ascendancy. We have not been quite, and unfortunately for COVID, also on a declining trend. We're hoping that after COVID and after putting in place some recovery programs, we would have, picked up. But it appears our fiscal regime currently has some challenges that we may have to deal with, and that is having a serious toll in terms of our group and then the prospect of this group we're talking about.
But you're striking the difference. But if you look at the comparison and the way to go, government believes that taxes is indeed the way to go. Is that your position on this matter?
Could you please repeat the question?
The question about what strategy is best for us to adopt in terms of moving forward. Government says taxation is the way to go, generating income internally. That will help us.
I think currently our major issue, as I indicated earlier, has to do with our fiscal sector. In terms of the fiscal regime, how we are managing our revenue, coupled with how we are managing the expenditure, and its reflection in terms of growth. We were seeing the trend a bit earlier in terms of how our expenditure was, accelerating at faster rates against our revenue. And we all know we haven't been doing quite well in terms of revenue mobilization and in terms of coming up with innovative ideas of mobilizing revenue. And that has been the challenge of the current economic regime in terms of mobilizing revenue. The political aspect of it, the signal that was sent to Ghanaians earlier, that the economy will be managed in terms of productivity or production, but not on taxation. And then the expectation of the ordinary Ghanaians in terms of how the economy will be managed, particularly with the signal of Ghana beyond aid, the picture that was created in the minds of Ghanaians. So it's the expectation of the people, the economic expectation of the people, as against the reality on the ground. With government thinking that taxation is the way to go, if you are in government position, it's very, very difficult as of now in terms of how do you mobilize revenue. Bear in mind, this year we haven't been able to go to the Euro market or go for Eurobond, and that is having a serious challenge in terms of fiscal and how we'll be able to perform or embark or execute the projects that we have envisaged to in the budget. And looking at that, you would want to side with government a little bit in terms of how to expand the tax net and how to mobilize revenue. But at the same time, if you are on the side of the household and businesses, which is also trying to recover from the shock of COVID, and coupled with a couple of taxes that have been introduced, I think last year in terms of our petroleum sector, and its impact on the finances of businesses and it will be quite difficult for you to accept that strategy in terms of coming up with more taxes, particularly the E-levy that's up, that we're talking about.
Right.
So depending on the perspective you are looking at it from, but I would want to side with businesses and then households. And my grounds will largely be on the objective, economic objective of the country, at least looking at the welfare and the happiness of the ordinary Ghanaian.
All right, then. I'm grateful, Godwin Emisa is a chartered economist. Thank you for joining us.